Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
Germany's economy and energy minister and business representatives are visiting China. A global partnership is launched in Beijing to fight poverty. And China warns Quad countries against bloc confrontation. Hello and welcome to World Today, a news program with a different perspective. I'm Do Hongyu in Beijing. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. Our first story. Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng has called on China and Germany to consolidate the foundation of traditional cooperation and tap the potential for cooperation in emerging fields. He made the remarks while meeting with Germany's economy and energy minister Katharina Reiche and German business representatives in Beijing. The vice premier expressed the hope that both sides will promote the sustained and healthy development of bilateral economic and trade relations through high-level cooperation. Reiche describes Germany as a reliable economic and trade partner of China. She says the German business community remains confident in China's prospects and innovation capabilities and is committed to deepening cooperation with the country. For more, we're joined by Zhou Mi, a senior research fellow with the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Zhou Mi. A delegation of around 40 German business representatives is accompanying the German Minister of Economy and Energy in China. And at the same time, a survey by the German Chamber of Commerce in China showed that over half of German companies called for policy support to help build partnerships between German and Chinese firms. So why are German businesses showing such strong interest in the Chinese market?
If you look at the economy of China for the first quarter, China's GDP has grown much faster, even the expectations of the 5.0 point for this year. So I think that's really giving many German companies some confidence that China is really a big market. And second, I would say that is also because China's government's attitudes towards development, especially for the foreign direct investors. I think that is also, when German companies trying to deal with the uncertainties in the world, like for some of this protectionism and unilateralism. So they are really want to embrace certainty. And the third, I would say, also because that when they are seeing their competitors, maybe the competitors from United States and other countries are already being here in China for the previous month. So they really want to catch up with their competitors and trying to have a better share on China's market.
Now, reports say the European Union is considering tougher trade measures and safeguard mechanisms targeting China, while the German Minister of Economy and Energy warns that trade barriers against China could trigger countermeasures and hurt Germany as an export-oriented economy. So how concerned is Germany about the economic costs of escalating trade tensions with China?
So we know that Germany is a manufacturing economy, so it has a lot of relations with its export. When the export is getting stronger, I think that the economy will benefit from them. When the export is not that strong, I think that the economy will suffer from that. China is the largest trading partner of Germany last year. It is, improved from the second largest of the year before. So I think that is also a very good evidence to show that China is playing an even more important role in Germany's exports. So when they are trying to discuss about the future, I think that they really want to depend on the certainty. That's the reason why I say that Germany's companies or they want to encourage their government to behave according to the real globalization. Well, on the other hand, I need to say that Germany is always a country who wants to support the globalization and the freedom of the trade. So it's not so surprising to me that they want, not just because they thought that the trade protectionism will benefit them, but they really want to embrace the globalization and enjoy the benefits of doing businesses with major economies, including China.
Now, as a big German business delegation is in China, which areas of cooperation do you expect the most between China and Germany in the years to come?
Well, I would say there may be two possible channels. The first one is that cooperation may be existing in the ways of improving the resilience of the supply chain. German German economy is a kind of manufacturing, and it is also true in China. So we can do more cooperation to strengthen the supply chains among us to benefit both of us. And the second, I would say there something to do with renewable energy, the green economy, digital economy, those kind of very innovative ways. I mean that if you're looking at robots, low altitude economies, and all the other areas, China is really very promising. So we can do more to support Germany's economy by improving its efficiency and ability to deal with the problems, including the climate change and other issues.
Then turning to Europe, a report notes that nearly 1/3 of European companies are maintaining or expanding their supply chains in the Chinese mainland. At a time when the EU is promoting the idea of de-risking from China, why are European companies continuing to double down on expanding businesses in the country?
Well, I would say that EU companies are really having their attitude. And I think that attitude is very clear that when they're coming to China, investing here, or even have the trade relation with the Chinese stakeholders, they really benefit from that. I think that from the two sides, they both are beneficiary. The first is from the demand side. China's market is super large. We have such a large economy and a wide range of demands, which is really what the EU companies want to have, like for the small and medium-sized enterprises from Italy, and also some of the companies from even France. They want to export their agricultural products to China. And on the other hand, I will say that from the supply side, it's also true. Chinese manufacturing are having complete structures. We are having a very strong abilities on almost all the subsectors of the industries. So that's the reason why they want to be more supported by the certainties, by more resilient global supply chains. I think that is also, when the other economies, even including the United States, cannot provide for the EU companies on these kind of two areas.
Now, Germany and Spain are pushing back on EU's plan to restrict Chinese suppliers, which is under a new cybersecurity law. In the meantime, the U.S. warns Spain to be very careful in deepening ties with China. In your opinion, why do Germany and Spain oppose the plan?
Well, I noticed that the King of Spain has visited China several times in the recent 2 years. I think they really represent the ideas of the government on improving or trying to enhancing the cooperation with China. I mean, many Chinese companies investing in Spain, like in the infrastructure, in the electricity or other areas, and they also provide so many new opportunities for the Spanish companies in the form of the e-commerce or other modes. I think that is also, happening in Germany, like we have already mentioned. So even if the United States want to stop, or trying to reduce or restrict the cooperation from the EU side, I don't think that the companies really want to do with that. So it's not just about the attitudes of the government. It's really our decision made by the enterprises themselves. It's the market who is having the decisive roles in dealing with the relations with other economies. So the market choose China. I mean, that is for sure. And I believe that is also true for other members of the EU.
Then what are your comments on the U.S. pressure on Spain over its China policy?
I don't think that the U.S. is making our very wise decisions. Even they are trying to pressure their so-called allies or partners to de-risking or trying to decouple with Chinese economy. Their own companies are really doing the opposite decisions. So it's not just about the government-to-government interactions in the world. It is really important for the enterprises to benefit from this cooperation. When they are trying to cooperate with China, they are benefiting from the sustainable and the long term of the cooperation. So that's the reason why I believe that the threat or kind of a pressure from U.S. will not be even be effective in the short term, no matter on the longer term.
And this year we've seen several European leaders coming to visit China, and of course with their business delegations, including the leaders of the UK, Germany, and Ireland, and some other countries. What do you think this tells us about how European leaders see China's role in their economic development?
Well, all the leaders have their own philosophies on dealing with the relations with other countries. Maybe some of them do not believe that China is very important, but others really believe that China is playing a more and more important role. So it's not only about the economy, about the relations on the trade and the investment, specific products or specific sectors. I mean that there are more wider concerns about China's roles in the global governance issues. So there are so many opportunities for both sides of China and the EU and other European economies to sit down and discuss about the possible ways or more effective ways for us to deal with the uncertainties and benefits from this cooperation. That's the reason why they come here. We have more communications and we will have more understanding about each other, and there may be more opportunities.
Then looking ahead, do you think EU members are moving toward a more confrontational approach toward China, or will economic realities push both sides toward more cooperation and compromise?
Practically, I would say that it is really our important issue between China and the EU, because that EU is suffering from so many challenges, including the inflation, the short supply of the energies, and the lack of enough innovation. And China has those kind of advantages. So we have so many complementary advantages by both sides. We can do more to improve the relations by talk, by discussion, or even by the negotiation, instead of just trying to do something unilaterally. And in my understanding that EU is not like the United States. They do not have the position and also the structure of trying to do some very unilaterally protectionism, and that is not aligned with their beliefs on the supporting of the globalization. So I believe that we do have more to cooperate instead of just confrontations or even trying to have more so-called trade war against each other. And on the other hand, I can find that there are already some kind of consensus reached by China and the United States. So we can even do more by the two economies between China and the EU.
Thank you very much. That was Zhou Mi, a senior research fellow with the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. Coming up, a global partnership is launched in Beijing to fight poverty. This is World Today. Stay tuned. China and 53 other countries, along with 9 international organizations, have initiated a global partnership in a major step to fight poverty. The Global Partnership for Poverty Alleviation and Development was unveiled at the Global Poverty Reduction and Development Forum in Beijing. It aims to share poverty reduction experiences and explore ways to fundamentally eliminate poverty. According to the United Nations, over 1 billion people across over 100 countries live in multidimensional poverty. Nearly 900 million of them face the combined burdens of poverty and severe climate hazards, underscoring the urgent need for broader global cooperation. For more, my colleague Song Ruixin spoke with Professor Liu Baocheng, the director of the Center for International Business Ethics and the University of International Business and Economics.
Professor Liu, let me begin with the broader picture. Why is the establishment of the new partnership considered a significant milestone in global poverty reduction?
Well, the establishment of such a global partnership for poverty alleviation and development is a very significant one because it reflects a broader shift in the global anti-poverty agenda shifting from the traditional aid delivery towards development-driven poverty reduction. So this is really drawing on the experience in many years while recognizing that poverty today is no longer just about humanitarian relief. It is increasingly tied to structural issues such as infrastructure gaps, digital exclusion, food security, climate vulnerability, and many other problems that really endangers the development opportunities. So in a way, it is no longer there to help to remove the symptom, but rather to diagnose and also try to remove the root cause of those symptoms as poverty exhibits itself. So the emphasis is really more practical rather than purely giving financial aid. It also mentions about South-South cooperation. Most of the focus is on the catering of technology and market integration, while experience sharing among many developing countries are also being encouraged. So this is really significant also against the global context where geopolitical tensions, inflation, and debt pressures are still looming large over these poverty-stricken countries and communities.
You talked about infrastructure gaps and climate challenges. Do you think all of these make it different from previous initiatives?
Yes, because people often talk about colloquially, whether to give fish or teaching fishing skills, but this is there to not only to give the fishing skills, but also is there to deal with the fishing pond, equip them with more of the fishing equipment. More importantly, is there for capacity building. This is there to really invest heavily in the rural infrastructure, building connectivity, providing healthcare, education, and also the food distribution system. And more of those private sectors and NGOs are also being calibrated to join this entire campaign. So this is there to cater to more of the impact-driven rather than the pro forma type of operation.
Okay. And meanwhile, I've seen UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said in his message to the forum that, quote-unquote, guided by these global commitments and the solutions discussed at this forum, we can shape economies that put people first and continue our fight to reduce and end poverty. In your view, what would a people-first economy actually look like in practice, especially for some low-income countries?
For low-income countries, the priority is, do they have jobs? And do they have access to food and a health supply? So it's not really the calculation of GDP or its growth rate or superficial type of election system based on the traditional type of democracy. And then whether people can really travel freely with more of the support of the infrastructure, also whether people have the mobility. I think more importantly, are people given the hope that they can live a better tomorrow? So this is there to ensure that growth is really there to benefit a larger number of people rather than those urban elites. It means build a high level of resilience where many of those developing countries are still highly vulnerable to some of the external shocks. Therefore, the type of capacity building, the type of catering to the practical need, and also the wider spread of those benefits are really there to be more expected in order to arrive on the people-first economy.
Right, like you said, poverty alleviation is about a large number of people, not just the elites. And when we discuss poverty reduction in practice, Professor Liu, China is inevitably part of the global conversation because the country has lifted around 800 million people out of absolute poverty and meeting the UN 2030 agenda target 10 years ahead of the schedule. What does this experience offer to the rest of the world, and how replicable is it in different national contexts?
China's success has been remarkable in the poverty alleviation due to a number of, or rather a whole package of solutions. One is the institutional structure where Chinese economy can really spread the benefit into many what was formerly termed as dark corners of this country, and there has been a very steadfast policy continuation. Then infrastructure is a basis, but also China can also leverage its a unique traditional culture of the family type of operation, where the more affluent group of people, the more affluent regions, can really offer more of the support, either in financial aid or in shipping those neglected regions into the entire supply chain. So these are really the important measures and also important lessons China can really offer. The other is that China is also highly rooted in the development type of alleviation program instead of solely offering the cash transfer. So we are able to, in a way, combine the transportation, industrial development, education, healthcare, and now utilizing more of the digital platforms for the entire rural revitalization program in a very coordinated strategy. Another very important point during the last more than 1 decade is really the targeted poverty alleviation, meaning that policies were designed to cater to individual households, even within some of the seemingly affluent regions. This is there to help to deliver to the right point and also to achieve the desired impact.
Okay, so it sounds like one of the key lessons from China's experience is that poverty alleviation requires not just funding, but also a strong institutional organization and long-term policy continuity. And increasingly, the international community is also paying attention to how China translates that experience abroad. So how has China been contributing to poverty reduction overseas in recent years?
We see the reality that most of the poverty problems exist in those global South countries, and China politically and diplomatically is highly bonded with the global South. Increasingly, the overseas development cooperation with the poverty reduction goals are really becoming not only part of the Chinese government agenda, but also for its business drive who invest or trade with overseas partners. China also embraces a holistic approach along the Belt and Road Initiative framework. So by developing roads, railways, airports, and energy projects that can really improve those economic connectivities and also the employment opportunities, not to mention about surrounding more of the tax income to the local community and also to their host government. And for example, in Africa, Chinese Agricultural Demonstration Center have also helped to transfer the farming technologies to improve their productivity. And we have also expanded more of the capacity building program like vocational training schools and Confucius language schools. And we also offer heavy and consistent scholarship to many of those, not only younger generation, but also to local business startups and even government officials to learn the Chinese experience and exchange further ideas on how we can really deepen our collaboration.
So this also reflects an evolving approach to development cooperation. Chinese Vice Premier Liu Guozhong emphasized letting markets and technology play a greater role in poverty reduction. Professor Liu, how do you interpret this approach? Does it signal a shift from traditional aid models?
Well, I often say that there are no underdeveloped economies, but undermanaged economies. The key is really the institutional structure where you allow free market operation, whether you have a rule-based business environment to attract both domestic startups and also the global investment, and whether you have a cleaner government where you can really have a more predictable policy and also trying to refrain from corruption. The other issue is that the access of technology. Having access to technology does not only mean that you learn all the know-how and tricks, but whether you are able to provide the right type of soil for better productivity. And I think the more fundamentally would also be the capacity building, because If people do not know where there is a better marketplace that can sell in large scale and a higher price, then a self-sufficient type of economy won't really bring them better productivity and also better profitability. And then, the global diplomacy is also very important because showing the right type of respect to the principles set forth by the United Nations, by also teaming up with global institutions like IMF, World Bank, and also working with more of those countries like China so that they are able to open their horizon, open their marketplace, teaming up with more of the strategic advantages in order to achieve a synergy through cooperation and collaboration and even competition with many other countries. That would be the way to bring up a better economy and also give people more of the confidence.
That was Professor Liu Baocheng, the director of the Center for International Business Ethics at the University of International Business and Economics. More to come. China warns Quad countries against bloc confrontation. You're listening to World Today. We'll be back after a short break.
Hello, my name is Alessandro Golombiewski Teixeira. I'm a professor of public policy and management at Tsinghua University in Beijing. I am a great listener of The World Today. In my opinion, The World Today is one of the best China radio programs. In The World Today, we can get the best news and analysis in what is happening now in the world. So please come to join us.
You're listening to World Today with me, Do Hongyu, in Beijing. China has issued a stark warning against bloc confrontation after top diplomats from the Quad countries, namely the US, India, Japan, and Australia, held talks in New Delhi. Beijing slams the Quad for forming exclusive small cliques and stirring regional tensions, insisting that cooperation in the Asia-Pacific should promote peace and prosperity rather than target third parties and create divisions. During the meeting, the Quad rolled out new cooperation initiatives covering maritime surveillance, critical mineral supply chains, and energy security. Beijing says their joint statement also made groundless remarks on the South China Sea and East China Sea. For more, Xu Yawen spoke with Warwick Powell, adjunct professor at Queensland University of Technology.
Professor Powell, the Quad has rolled out new initiatives on maritime surveillance, critical minerals, and energy. Some say these measures will strengthen regional resilience, but critics argue they're increasingly security-driven and aimed at containing China. How do you assess the real impact of these initiatives on the stability and development of the Asia-Pacific region?
I think we need to look at two aspects of the Quad. The first aspect is the motivations or the ambitions that underpin some of its recent activities. And I think it's fair to say that it is increasingly shaping up as a minilateral designed around the idea of containing China or responding to what the members of the Quad would see as shared risks. That's the ambition, that's the context. The second way that we need to evaluate the Quad is the extent to which the announcement that it makes and the sort of agreements that they come to, how realistic are they? Are they actually able to contribute to, firstly, the realisation of their own stated objectives, but just as importantly, whether there are any unintended consequences or side effects of the Quad pursuing the sorts of things that it has stated that it wishes to pursue. And that's where we start to enter into some dangerous territory, because policy initiatives or measures agreed between a small number of countries invariably have unintended consequences, not only on themselves, but on parties who are not involved with these decisions. And some of these consequences can be negative and which could give rise to escalating tensions and concerns within a region rather than contributing to enhanced stability and security. I think one of the risks that we have with the Quad, given its increasingly obvious ambitions around containing China, is that the measures that it seeks to pursue will ultimately lead to a less secure region rather than a more secure region.
Well, Professor, the Quad's joint statement touched on the South China Sea and East China Sea, despite not explicitly naming China. And Beijing has accused the group of promoting bloc confrontation. How do you view the tensions?
Well, again, it's important to understand that the Quad, as the name implies, has 4 member states. What it also means is that there are many other states within the region, many of whom actually border these 2 bodies of water, who are not included in this particular group of members. Indeed, only Japan, out of the Quad, the 4 members, have any connectivity to the bodies of water that we're talking about. The United States doesn't, unless, of course, you want to view the United States' interests through its network of proxies within the region, whether it's the Marcos administration in the Philippines or what have you. Australia certainly doesn't have any direct connection into these bodies of water, the South China Sea or the East China Sea, and India itself doesn't have any, direct relevance either to these 2 bodies of water. So clearly, it is an attempt by countries outside of the affected region seeking to interfere in the ways in which these parts of the world are ultimately governed by international law and by the agreements that impacted countries, the neighbouring countries, will ultimately reach with each other. The idea that countries outside of a region should seek to dictate terms to countries inside a region really reeks of the colonial legacies. And yes, you can understand the American having that attitude, as they have had for many years, many decades. You can even understand Australia having that particular attitude towards things, given that in large regards it can be understood or seen as a sub-imperial ally of the United States. But Japan really should have learned the lessons of history, that this sort of interventionism by Japan leads to no good, either for Japan or for the region. And India, which of course has suffered for many, many decades at the hands of British colonialism, should also know better than to behave like a colonialist itself.
Well, Professor, we have noticed that countries involved in the Quad appear to have somewhat contradictory approach toward China. On the one hand, they take part in these initiatives that are widely seen as countering China's influence. But on the other hand, they continue to maintain strong economic ties and practical cooperation with Beijing. So how do you explain this kind of dual-track strategy and their contradictory position?
Well, for a period of time, and we can take Australia as an example, but certainly not the only example of the 4, Australia has viewed its relationship with China through economic lenses, but at the same time leaned on its security relationship with the United States on the belief that these were not contradictory. But of course, the United States increasingly seeks to force countries to make an either-or choice. This is not something that China does. China is willing to, and has demonstrated this historically, to engage with other countries on their merits, not in terms of, targeting third parties, but literally on the issues at hand and on their merits. The Americans, however, are past masters of bloc formation, where they use divide and conquer strategies to generate conflict and tensions in regions so as to justify their continued presence within a region and to play parties off against each other. So historically, countries have viewed these as non-contradictory pathways, but increasingly the Americans are trying to force their hand and compel countries to make these sorts of choices. I think countries will continue to resist that because their economic lifeline is tied very much to their ongoing interactions with the Chinese economy. It's important to remember the heft that the Chinese economy brings to the table. Globally, of course, on PPP terms, it is by far and a long way the largest economy in the world. Obviously, on nominal terms, it's the second largest. It is the only industrial superpower in the world with capacity in every product category. No other country in the world matches that. It is an energy superpower in terms of the electrification of the country. So in that sense, you cannot ignore China. Inside Asia itself, On PPP terms, China's GDP contributes over 60% of regional gross domestic product. So nobody in the region can afford to not be interacting with the Chinese economy. What they're hoping, of course, is that they won't have to make a choice. China won't force them to make a choice, but the Americans are constantly trying to force others to make a choice.
And lastly, Professor, before we let you go, the Quad Leaders Summit scheduled for later this year in Australia still appears uncertain. And some say this points to growing internal divisions within the group and reflects the gradual decline in the Quad's overall influence. Do you agree with that kind of assessment? And what do you see as the main factors driving divisions among the four members?
Well, the four members have never really had any cohesive, positive agenda that unites them. The only thing that they've got is a negative agenda, which is an agenda framed by fear and anxiety and a desire to channel their collective efforts against another country. Now, that's not going to take you very far in the long run. The bottom line is that countries, particularly in today's turbulent world, need greater stability and they need to find ways of coexisting with their neighbours and, importantly, being able to work constructively with major economic powers within their own regions. All of this is in the name of not only security in a narrow sense, but in the name of prosperity and peace in a much broader sense. The Quad simply does not align with those broader imperatives. This is why there is an inability to hold it together in a meaningful sense, and there is a continual effort to fabricate reasons for its existence and for the meetings that it has. And its latest twist is, of course, in this securitization direction. It's unfortunate, but it is a fact of life at the moment. But I think in the long run, these sorts of minilaterals or small blocs ultimately are contrary to the national interests of each of the countries within the region, and in the end, we will see countries realise that this sort of mini-block formation does nobody any good at all.
That was Warwick Powell, adjunct professor at Queensland University of Technology. Coming up, Norway is set to join a nuclear deterrence initiative led by France. This is World Today. We'll be back.
Welcome. I am Chu Zhang, Deputy Director at the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Fudan University. On the World Today program, we will dive beyond the headlines to uncover the stories, trends, and impacts that connect states across the globe. Join me on World Today.
Welcome back. Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre says that the country will join French President Emmanuel Macron's nuclear deterrence initiative. Støre said Norway's decision was based on the current security situation in Europe and that Europe must assume greater responsibility for its own security. He also emphasized that Norway's nuclear weapons policy remains unchanged. In March, Macron announced plans to strengthen France's nuclear arsenal by increasing the number of nuclear warheads. He also said France was prepared to add a European dimension to its nuclear deterrence strategy, noting that several European countries, including Britain, had expressed interest in the initiative. For more on this, we're joined by Dr. George Zagopoulos, Director of EU-China Programs and Senior Research Fellow at European Institute of Nice. Thank you so much for joining us, George.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, what are the reasons behind Norway's decision to come under France's nuclear umbrella?
I would say that Europe is currently encountered with new security challenges, especially in the aftermath of the war in Ukraine. And more recently, Europe is looking at how to respond to the new US foreign policy under President Trump. So these two significant developments are shaping how different European countries are understanding security. So within this context, I would say that Norway is prepared to explore something new as far as its defense policy is concerned by joining the French-led initiative. So these two reasons are the ones that I would identify: the new security environment and the impact of the policies of President Trump.
Then how will Norway's participation affect the overall security pattern across Europe?
We don't know much yet about the French-led nuclear initiative. We know that President Macron is determined to offer a security umbrella to different countries of Europe. And we know that France is the only nuclear power in the European Union. But beyond that, we don't know much about what other states will do apart some general remarks. And more importantly, France is heading toward important presidential elections next year. So I'm quite skeptical as far as the future of the initiative is concerned. So I would keep a rather mild approach concerning future developments.
Prime Minister Støre emphasized that Norway's nuclear weapons policy will remain unchanged. Then how can Norway balance its participation in this initiative while avoiding a major policy shift?
This is a very important question because certainly Norway for many years has rejected the potential usage of nuclear weapons, and its policy has been very clear. At the same time, by joining the French defense initiative, it does not mean that Norway is prepared to use nuclear weapons. I would rather consider it as a step in order for Norway to play a role in the new era, especially taking into account that the current status of NATO, important as it is certainly influenced by the rhetoric of the US president. But I don't see that Norway will change dramatically its doctrine as far as defense and nuclear policy is concerned.
Then what message is France trying to send by planning to expand its nuclear arsenal and enlarging its nuclear umbrella to cover more countries?
President of France, Emmanuel Macron, has for many years spoken about the necessity of the European Union to act strategically, autonomously in the international arena. And France, as the only EU nuclear member state, is taking the lead in that regard. So France attempts to play a stronger role as far as European defense is concerned, especially in the years of President Trump. But again, I would move the discussion into the domestic politics sphere of France, because the opposition in France is not particularly satisfied with the initiative of the French president. So we have to wait and see. But certainly the current president of France, Emmanuel Macron, is envisaging a new role of France at the defense in the defense sphere.
Now, several countries, including Germany, Poland, the Netherlands, and Sweden, have agreed to participate in this plan. What drives these countries to support closer nuclear cooperation with France?
Again, it is not very clear what the other countries will do, because what we know is that perhaps they will participate in some exercises, or that they will be prepared to station some fighters that carry nuclear weapons. We don't know more than that. And obviously, a general remark can be given, which is that several EU member states are determined to push toward strategic autonomy of the European Union in the defense sector. I would certainly link that to the current status of transatlantic relations and several problems which are on the agenda, including Greenland, for example. The European Union is making some steps, but again, I would say that it remains heavily dependent on the European Union as far as security affairs are concerned.
Now, do you think France has enough capabilities to hold the nuclear umbrella for these countries, within Macron's term? And what constraints and challenges is it facing?
Well, to start with, it's important to mention that President of France, Emmanuel Macron, has said that perhaps France will increase the number of nuclear warheads, which has been a very important statement. As far as restraints are concerned, I would say that, the European Union has for many years been dependent on the United States as far as its own security is concerned. And therefore, it is quite difficult for it to completely abandon this approach and act strategically autonomously. And currently, we are experiencing these difficulties as far as the future course of the Ukraine crisis is concerned. I would place the discussion in the context of the interest of France to show resilience and to show the determination in the area of defense initiatives. But again, I wouldn't be extremely optimistic as far as a stronger role of the European Union in that regard is concerned.
Now, as the countries joining France's nuclear deterrence initiative are also NATO members, so how do you think the US might respond?
Well, the United States under President Trump expects from its partners to pay more, and this is already happening. But at the same time, there are crucial differences in the general approaches of European countries and the United States under President Trump. And this was clear in the case of the Iran war, for example. I would say that the United States under President Trump is still endorsing this approach of business style understanding of security affairs. So it depends on how EU member states will negotiate with the United States as far as other issues are concerned, like the trade agreements or like the potential acquisition of U.S. weapons. I'm looking forward to the next NATO summit to take place in Turkey in July. I think it will be important in that regard. So it depends on how the American administration understands the European initiative itself. If it believes that the European Union is prepared to act together with the United States in order for the United States to move its attention towards other areas of the world, then its response might be positive. If it believes that the European Union acts autonomously, as France envisages, then it will be a completely different reaction.
Thank you very much. That was Dr. George Zagopoulos, Director of EU-China Programs and Senior Research Fellow at European Institute of Nice. You're listening to World Today. Coming up, China's releases new measures to curb fatigue driving. Stay tuned. China is introducing new rules aimed at reducing fatigue driving. Authorities remind drivers to better manage driving hours and maintain good physical conditions to avoid penalties and improve road safety. The new regulations issued by China's Ministry of Public Security will take effect on June the 1st. They provide clearer standards for identifying fatigue driving, as well as procedures for investigations and evidence collection following traffic accidents. Traffic police may determine drowsy driving based on monitoring equipment, driver behavior, and other factors such as lack of sleep and heavy physical activity before driving. Now, for more on this, we're joined by Liu Kuangyu, a researcher with the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Liu.
Yes, thank you. This is Kuangyu.
First of all, how do the new fatigue driving rules differ from the previous regulations? And what are the biggest changes drivers should pay attention to?
Yeah, compared to the old regulations, I think we can see that the update rules fixed fuzzy standards from the previous system. The biggest change is that the fatigue is no longer judged only by continuous driving time. These new rules add multidimensional indicators like personal physical condition, like sleep status, like pre-driving activities and on-road driving behaviors, and so on. So it also clarifies and unified investigation and evidence collection procedures for fatigue-related accidents. For drivers, the key takeaway is that the fatigue driving isn't just like driving over 4 hours and more. Any behavior that reduces your driving ability may now be identified and penalized under new rules.
And how serious is fatigue driving as a road safety problem today in China? And why is there a need for more specific definitions and enforcement guidelines now?
Yeah, fatigue driving is one of the top 3 hidden killers of highway safety in China, right after speeding and drunk driving. The official track data shows fatigue driving causes over some like 10% of fatal highway accidents, which is way higher than many drivers realize. In the past, vague standards caused a lot of enforcement disputes. Like there was no clear rules on how to confirm fatigue when a driver's driving time couldn't be fully tracked. And more specific guidelines close these loops right now, make law enforcement fairer and constantly remind drivers of the risks, which ultimately reduces overall accidents.
Now, according to the rules, driving duration seems to be a key factor in determining fatigue driving. For example, as you said, drivers who operate a vehicle for over 4 consecutive hours without a break or who take a break of less than 20 minutes are considered to be drowsy driving. What supports are needed to identify how long they have been driving and whether they have had enough rest?
Yes, there are a lot of things we must do or we can do from now on. Like first, mandatory onboard monitoring for commercial vehicles. Most long-haul trucks already have GPS right now, but also they're driving recorders. But we need unified data access standards for traffic police to check quickly. And second, we need better highway rest area infrastructure to verify if a driver actually rested. We need a car check-in and check-out and parking records from these rest areas. And third, we need more public awareness. For private car drivers, they need to voluntarily record their driving and rest time by themselves, since full monitoring for all private cars is pretty unrealistic right now.
And other indicators include insufficient sleep, heavy physical or mental activity, the use of medication, or intense exercise, such as hiking within the 24 hours before driving. Beyond serving as benchmarks for enforcement, how important is it for drivers themselves to recognize and manage these risks in order to avoid accidents?
Yes, I think that is actually the main point of this new regulation, that it is far more important than enforcement and penalty itself. We know that penalty is just a backstop. The self-management of the drivers is the first line of defense against fatigue and secure the driving and public safety. These indicators actually they are actually clear risk warnings for drivers. If you know you just sleep for example, like 5 hours last night and did very heavy exercise the day before or take sedating medicine and so on, you can choose not to drive long distance before you even start. Most fatigue accidents are completely actually preventable, and so lives can be saved. The rules don't just exist and invented to fine people. They are trying actually to teach drivers to recognize their own physical limits and develop safer habits of driving, which cuts accidents at the source.
And finally, since many drivers might be listening to our show while driving, so beyond penalties and more precise identification, what more can be done to reduce fatigue driving?
Yes, like what I said, we need to work both on infrastructure and public education, not just rely on penalties. We need to improve the rest area services and highways. Many existing rest areas don't have enough parking spots for example, like large trucks and those commercial drivers, and also they need comfortable rest areas for drivers to take a proper nap. And expanding and upgrading these facilities directly encourage more drivers to stop and rest. And second, target education for different groups. For example, like for commercial fleets, push companies to enforce reasonable work schedules, and instead of forcing drivers to meet very extremely tight deadlines. And for private drivers, promote the idea that driving while tired is just as dangerous as, for example, like drunk driving or driving under influence. So we need more public campaigns. And finally, introduce more incentives. We see some insurance companies already give lower premiums to drivers with very good safe driving records. So that can encourage long-term safe habits.
Thank you very much. So the new rules may be a great lesson for drivers. That was Liu Kuangyu, a researcher with the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. And that's all the time for this edition of World Today. I'm Do Hongyu in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.